Hello, hello, hello. I'm Zombie24. I'm here with Hexmatron. Hi, Hexmatron.
Hi. I just went live. Hi.
Sounds good, sounds good. But today, despite that sounding good, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Or Iceland. How are you doing?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Part of that for me, at least. But over here, I heard something is rotten in the state of or Iceland.
Yeah, Denmark or Iceland, one of the two. It has to be one. But I mean, welcome, Hexmatron. Welcome, anybody watching, to the first meeting of the Z24 Movie Club. The club where my friends, like Hexmatron, care about movies, and so they're making me watch them. In turn, I'm making my friends play a video game that I don't care about in the slightest. Instead, at these meetings, I'm going to be giving my analysis and review of the film that we're talking about in that day. For today's meeting, Hexmatron will be playing Hamlet, or the last game without MMORPG features, shaders, and product placement, and I'll be talking about The Northman, a movie by one of Hexmatron's favorite directors. So I will swap over to seeing, we have this sort of jury-rigged Discord setup for us to see what this game is. All right, and at that point, I'm pretty much never talking about this game again.
I've got a little setup here. This game doesn't seem to want to be played on stream. So it has an interesting aspect ratio. It has no settings options. So we're working things out. I don't know. Tell me when you're ready to start, and how do you want to start your little film club talk?
Well, I guess. Okay, all right. One more. Whenever you want to start, I'll start talking as well. Whenever you want to start with your thing, I'll pay a little bit of attention to whatever's going on the screen.
I kind of don't want to do this, but it's gonna be great. I'm gonna hit start.
Well, with that, it is time to avenge our fathers, save our mothers, and kill our foolishness. My analysis...
There's a lot of text on the screen of this game.
Okay, well, I don't care. My analysis will follow a thread of etymology, gender, and incest, which are all connected by Norse mythology and Icelandic folklore. By examining these topics of the film, I want to reweave the film around its leads and discuss what I think it's actually about. I'm also going to give a quick summary of the movie with my naturally biased interpretations, which can be catalysts for discussions on those topics as well. So, do you have any questions, Hex? Or are you a little distracted, or should I jump into the summary of the film while whatever's happening with you?
A man from the future crashed on Hamlet in his time machine.
Well, fate is important. So, let's get into why fate could be important by getting into the actual plot synopsis and whatever the hell you're talking about. So, here's the plot synopsis of The Northman. It's not really that quick. It might take me a little while. Spoiler warnings ahead, obviously, because I'm just going to be talking about what happens in The Northman. So, alright. Beginning of the film, Amleth's dad returns from raiding. His name is Aurvandil, and he fears he may die soon. So him and his totally not boyfriend, simply just his fool, Heimr, prepare to make their son grow up. Amleth their son obviously, comes of age by touching his biological father's bleeding slit in a ritual where he is entered into his dynastic tree as long as he promises 3 things: avenge your bio dad in his death, protect your bloodline, and like women only enough to the point where you aren't all gay about liking women. Quickly after the ritual, Amleth's bio dad dies to his bastard uncle Fjölnir, and his other dad is tortured to death off screen. Amleth escapes, knowing his dads are dead, that his mom was taken by his uncle, and that he must honor his vows. Many years down the line, Amleth is raiding under the name of Beowulf, or Björnulfr, in the Kievan Rus, and when the horrors he brings upon the Slavs reminds him of the horrors he faced as a kid, Björk is able to manipulate him by telling him that he will find a weapon made to kill his uncle and kill him in a northern volcano. It is just Björk doing that, really. When asked what is in it for her, Björk tells Amleth that his actions will beget a maiden king. So, Amleth disguises himself and joins the Slav slaves who are bound to the northern location of Iceland, where his uncle currently rules. Once there, he meets a he-witch in the possession of the head of pure Heimr. Through a seance where he talks to the head of Heimr, Heimr tells Amleth of the blade called Draugr, which may only be used at night or at the gates of hell. The he-witch warns Amleth that revenge may have a side effect of making him choose between loving his kin or hating his enemies. Amleth accepts the risks of his new medication, acquires Draugr, and with the help of a lover granted to him for his loyalty by the family, the Slav Olga of the Birch Forest, Amleth terrorizes and kills many around Fjölnir. After revealing himself to his mother Gudrun, she plays on his Oedipus complex and identity issues to placate him while revealing she was a slave who hated his father, but she truly does love his uncle. After Amleth kills their first son in anger, Gudrun reveals Amleth to Fjölnir, so Amleth and Olga save each other via religious imagery that makes little physical sense before deciding to flee from the cycle of violence. But Amleth has a womanly vision by touching a bleeding cut on Olga's throat, sees her birch forest is pregnant with twins, including the Maiden King. He quickly comes to believe that he needs to re-enter the fight on the cycle of violence on the side of violence by killing Fjölnir, so he abandons his pregnant wife, which of course will in some way save his pregnant wife. While attempting to kill Fjölnir alone, Amleth pulls a Hamlet and kills Fjölnir's whole family, so the two men decide the best next course of action is to duel at a Christian hell-like volcano, resulting in Fjölnir's beheading and Amleth's heart being stabbed out. It is implied here that Amleth then ascends into Valhalla, while the Maiden King and her brother survive birth. So, any questions about that synopsis? Anything you think important that was left out?
I'm sorry. I'm actually so lost in this game already. This is fine. We don't have to talk about the game. It's fine. Yeah, Did you talk about Draugr and stuff? I don't think it's that.
I mentioned that Draugr is the blade and how it may only be unsheathed at night, kind of like how it looks like it might be nighttime here in this video game here, because everything's dark.
You think that's Yorick?
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see a Yorick anywhere.
There's a little skull in this cage.
I don't know. That's unimportant to. I don't think it's anything related.
The lever over here was blocked by the Discord overlay. Now everything makes sense.
I have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, Draugr. Do you have something you wanted to say about Draugr other than, it's unsheathed only at night or in the gates of hell. I think that's all I said. You know, it's also the blade meant to kill Fjölnir. It was forged to do so.
Yeah, I just didn't hear you mention that. I was probably too focused at the time.
Okay. So, then let's begin talking and get into the initial analysis I wanted to talk about. So, let's start with this sort of name thing that we have going on, where Amleth, when he is in the Kievan Rus, is named Björnulfr. Now, I'm not entirely sure. Can you explain to me why he has the bear in the name, the bear, the Bjorn? Because as far as I can tell, the only reason to really have that would be to emphasize the berserker nature of the Kievan Rus Vikings.
I mean, you just gave the only answer I could have, really. I don't know. He chose. It could just have to do with the extreme overcompensation of his character as well. Just like, yeah, no, he's the bear and the wolf. But mostly I think it just ties into his whole berserker thing. Although the berserkers do wear wolf skins, not bear skins in the movie.
They do wear wolf skins, and I think that is for some very important reasons, such as the ritual that sort of he undertakes to become a man is a ritual in which his father and himself represent the two wolves of Odin. What are their names? Garmr and the other one? What is the other one's name? Or no, Garmr is the Hell's wolf. What were their names? The two wolves of Odin. I have forgotten.
I'm so for real with you right now. I do not. I can't think of two wolves of Odin.
Gary and Frecky, according to Google.
Frecky, are those? Gary and Frecky, aren't the? What are the names of the ones who chase the sun and moon?
That is a good question. I do not know that, at all. I will look that up. In wolves in Norse mythology who chase the sun and moon. So, in Skål and Hati.
Skål and Hati, okay. Yeah. I don't know, there's kind of a lot of wolves in Norse myth. I don't know as much as I probably should. For someone who says that I know a lot. No, I'm normal.
Yeah, so, I mean, Gary and Frecky, I mean, most wolves in Norse myth go back to a single wolf in Norse myth. Whenever you have a wolf or a dog in Norse myth, they will always go back to Fenrir, the wolf which is bound by the gods and is destined to eventually kill Odin. And the All-Father figure who is the patron deity of Aurvandil and Amleth, and is sort of this representation of masculinity and the brutality and warfare of such a thing. So I think that the Ulfur at the end is the wolf that is being given the name, or has a name attached to Amleth, is connected to really these wolves in a somewhat attached way because of that initial ritual, but also attached more so to more so attached to Fenrir, and actually another wolf, not a wolf, but another dog that I accidentally mentioned earlier. I will bring that up later when we get more into the incest route of discussing things. So we'll get into that later. We'll talk about that, its relation to Fenrir, but I do think that Fenrir is the biggest thing first, because next let's talk about Fjölnir. Fjölnir is Amleth's uncle, and the funny thing is Amleth is a name taken straight from Saxo Grammaticus's History of the Danes, and so that is a direct name taken. Fjölnir, as with most of the characters in the film, have names that are vastly different from their prototypical characters in Saxo Grammaticus's Amleth, and I think are quite different from the characters in the future creation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So originally, the uncle character is named Fang, kind of like Scar from The Lion King, but in this, he is named Fjölnir. I think there is one very obvious reason for this. Amleth and Hamlet are always going to be stories about projection, and Amleth or Hamlet projecting onto the other characters in the story, or characters taking on traits from other characters in the story. And so Fjölnir being named such a thing, we have moments where Amleth repeatedly calls himself a fool, or instead when he is like disparaging Fjölnir, it's clear that he's talking about himself and not actually talking about Fjölnir, because there's no reason that would make any sense. Such as when he first acquires Draugr, he immediately goes to kill Fjölnir. Like, he gets it and he immediately goes, and then he's like, oh, I'm so dumb. I was supposed to kill him in a volcano. I can't do it, obviously. And then as soon as he does that, he calls Fjölnir a coward. And like, there is part of it where Fjölnir is a bit cowardly in that situation because he didn't have sex with a woman who was on her period, because he was attempting to have sex with Olga, and he doesn't because she's on her period. And so there's part of it where you can think of that as a cowardly thing, but I think seeing how Amleth sees the world from this very masculine point of view, I think it's more so him projecting his own cowardice on Fjölnir for not killing Fjölnir in that moment where he had a good chance to do so. So that is one, I think, basic etymological or English reason to do so. I guess it's not actually the etymology there. We can also talk further about this. We can talk further about their projection and their similarities of Amleth and Fjölnir by looking at the Norse etymology for these names. So Fjölnir and is something like hidden sometimes etymologically looked at, maybe the hider of pots, considering certain stories about Fjölnir figures in Norse histories, whereas Amleth is etymologically sort of about insanity and foolishness. So obviously the foolishness, we're getting the Fjölnir back, we're in the English fool word, but we're also getting this sort of hidden madness from both of these characters, etymologically speaking. So that is one way to look at this sort of the reason for naming this character Fjölnir instead of Fang. We have two other reasons, I believe. One will connect back to the Fenrirs, talking about Björnulfr as a name. It will connect back to Fenrir because, for this other reason, is that Fjölnir is one of Odin's many names, because Odin disguises himself a lot in Norse mythology, and another etymological meaning of Fjölnir is the wisest. And so Odin, the god of wisdom, the Allfather, is somebody who would go by the name Fjölnir. And so this makes it destiny for Björnulfr, the wolf Fenrir, to kill Fjölnir as he is destined to kill Odin. And so that's one connection that we can grab there. Any questions about those things so far before we get to the third reason to name him Fjölnir?
This puzzle's kicking my ass, sorry. Nah, I think I'm good. I have stuff to say about the full reason his name is that, but it requires a much... I think we need to be further into the conversation.
Okay. Totally. So we need to be much further into the conversation. All right. So another reason for his name to be Fjölnir is that Fjölnir in the story is a bastard brother of Aurvandil, and he becomes king by, killing Aurvandil and taking what he sees as his right to the kingdom. And this is very similar to another figure in the Norse histories, in that the first Swedish king is a figure named Fjölnir, who was not given divinity, was not deified as his forefathers were. This is very similar to not being legitimized as a rightful ruler. And so you can see this as this sort of bastardry equals humanity in this case, that there is this sort of divine situation that the kings are situated in. And there's just nothing... sorry, I was just looking at something. But yeah, there is this difference between humanity and divinity here with Fjölnir. So we can also talk about Aurvandil. Aurvandil is, I think, the only name in the Northman which comes directly from Saxo Grammaticus's histories. So that is a pretty, I think, normal reason to include such a character. To include that name for the character, because it's just what the source material says. But I do think that there are some funny things to do with it, such as Aurvandil being mythologically a sort of representation of the morning star of Venus. And so obviously for us, there is this connotation of the morning star with a Luciferian figure, with this sort of fall from grace. I think that is part of it, why he retains the name, because he is something that guides Amleth to his eventual doom at Hell, where he dies destined for Valhalla. Another thing is that his name etymologically is connected to iron and swords, as well as to erections, which is going to be, that's a big motif throughout the film. There are constant moments where things like Heimr will compare iron to the erect penis. There are moments where, when I was talking about the sort of Oedipian play by the mother, her name's Gudrun, right? I believe so. Gudrun plays on this sort of Oedipian thing by sort of like talking about his sword as if it is a penis, in this sort of play on words with that. And so there is a lot of, like, Aurvandil makes a strong connection between masculinity, between sexual masculinity and warfare masculinity. I think what it also does is Aurvandil, the war raven, versus Fjölnir being a follower of Freyr, son of Freyr, because with the Swedish king, he is son of Freyr. When we have that, we see that they're sort of delving into each other's domains, and it's sort of harder to distinguish them from one another and the gods they worship and why they worship them, when one guy is the son of Freyr, and yet also being the son of Freyr, he is Odin, and the other guy is literally name comes down to talking about the sword as a penis. Anything else on that point?
I I think I just killed someone, and it wasn't the boss.
Amleth kills plenty of people.
What were you asking? I'm sorry.
I was asking if you had any questions about the sort of broken distinctions between Freyr and Odin, given Aurvandil's name and Fjölnir's names.
What's the deal with Aurvandil's name?
Aurvandil is Aurvandil Warraven in the film. And, I think I have just messed up the thing. It just has gone to a different... okay, we're back to streaming correctly. So Aurvandil Warraven is the name of the father of Amleth in the Northman. But it is also the case that Fjölnir, the follower of Freyr in the film, he is both son of Freyr, the non-deified son of Frey, as well as having a name for Odin. And so it sort of breaks these distinctions between them, because Aurvandil Warraven is like etymologically connected to swords and erections, which falls under Frey's domain. And Fjölnir's name being dichotomous in that way of son of Frey, also as one of Odin's names, makes them sort of very similar to one another.
Yes, I agree with all of this. I think that this bleeds into a lot of things. It is very much the movie comparing and contrasting these gods in blurry ways where, I think continuing to look at the characters as versions of Odin and Freyr, it has a lot to do with the themes of this. I hate this game. I'm sorry.
Man, that sucks.
Keep going.
Whatever. Couldn't care less. This is what you have wrought. This is your fate. Okay? You have to understand this is what fate's all about. Now, another character that I wanted to...
Password was password. They had a whole puzzle for me to figure out what it was, and I didn't understand the puzzle, but then the password was password.
Sometimes the password is just password.
Okay, keep going, please. I'm fascinated.
So another name I want to talk about before swapping over to discussing other things is that of Heimr. Heimr is the fool. It is the sort of secondary father figure to Amleth. And Heimr, as far as I know, within Norse mythology itself, is going to be sort of connected to Brunhild. And so he is the uncle of Brunhild in Norse mythology. And Brunhild, I think, is connected to a lot of the other characters in the film that I haven't quite talked about yet. But making him the uncle of this figure, naming the fool that, immediately sets us up for the rest of the conflicts in the film and their relation to this almost protagonist character of Norse mythology here. Do you see any connections between Brunhild, Sigurd, and the mother of Amleth in the film, Gudrun?
I was actually going to ask if you could explain the connection between Heimr and Brunhild, because
He is
I'm missing
the
whatever that.
He is the uncle of Brunhild.
What the fuck? What happened? What?
I don't know, but yeah, Heimr in Norse mythology is the uncle of Brunhild, and so it sets us up for this whole situation between Brunhild and Gudrun, because Gudrun is the name of the mother in the movie, as well as Gudrun is the name of a character who sets about the death of Sigurd by Brunhild in their conflicts with one another.
This is very true.
So we were just talking about Heimr. I think that is what the reason for that. I do think that it is this sort of uncle figure for Amleth, while setting about Gudrun's rivalry with Brunhild, right? Because they have this very strong rivalry. It sets about a lot of kinslaying, and him being the uncle of Brunhild, sort of a foster father figure for a lot of characters, sets this up. But I can't think of much more for that, other than another reason Heimr might be used, which has something to do with, well, we can talk about here Draugr, the blade that is used by Amleth. Are you all good with that transition of talking about what Heimr might have to do with Draugr, since he is the one who gives Draugr to Amleth?
Yeah.
So, a Draugr, if you don't know, is a sort of corporeal spirit figure throughout a lot of Scandinavian folklore. So, they're typically presented as a soul that is in itself sort of a body. It's sort of a ghost that is possessing its own body in some cases. But depending on where you look, it's a little bit fuzzier on if it is a soul in a body. It's always going to be a corporeal, almost zombie figure, and it will generally be a spirit possessing its own corpse. But I think this distinction that exists just sort of by happenstance in how we speak about Draugr and in the histories of them is something that relates to Amleth, in that Amleth is both a sort of spirit that nobody sees killing everybody around Fjölnir, but Amleth is also a sort of soulless man who goes around, has no connections with anybody in life until he meets Olga, and that's the only connection he has with anybody in life, and they have a living connection in their twin children. But I think even more importantly, if we look at the Icelandic, Heimr is very similar to an Icelandic term for a specific type of Draugr.
Oh.
There is a type of Draugr in Icelandic folklore called an Elgin Hamr. I don't know quite if that's pronounced correctly, but of course, like I'm saying, I think it's very similar to Heimr for a good reason. This phrase means not confined to one form. So, giving Draugr to Amleth, not confined to one form, is again putting Amleth in that position of not necessarily being just a soul or just a body, but sort of being antithetically both at the same time, in the same way that Fjölnir is antithetically both son of Freyr and name of Odin, and Aurvandil is both follower of Odin as well as a walking personification of erections. So, with all of those characters who are kind of the same person, there is this reason that Heimr is the name given to the fool, in that he sort of continues to solidify this shape-shifting nature of these figures. Any thoughts?
Gender non-conformity or false binaries or something like
False
that.
binaries. Sure. Like,
I'm in pain.
oh, sucks to suck.
There's mental anguish on me this entire conversation.
Almeth is always in pain. You're just understanding Almeth's position. So, in my chat, I was asked, do I see a connection between twin children in Dune? I kind of do. I think that in Dune, when we're talking about twins, we are getting to this place where we're sort of talking about the eyes through which you see the future for the figure that is Paul Atreides. Whereas in this, we're going to be talking about eyes as a hindrance to the sight of the future. Whereas I don't necessarily see them as a hindrance to the sight of the future, other than they are definitely related to seeing the future in Dune, but only in that people can be blinded by how much they think they can see. So there is that sort of connection there that we can talk about, and when we talk about twins, we're seeing what we want to see in the twins. You can go back and wait, can you repeat that? I was just saying that blindness in the sort of fate thing is going to be all about you thinking you can see more than you actually are seeing. You are blinded by your belief in truth, in the truth of your eyes, in facts that aren't actually facts. So talking about false binaries, such as with gender and whatnot, we can talk about Valhalla, Hell, and in the film, I've sort of mentioned to you in a conversation outside of stream, there is also the mention of Freyr's Hall. So I know I mentioned to you outside of this. Did you find anything more about Freyr's Hall?
I was not able to find that term being used even. All I can imagine is that it is their way of saying Folkvanger probably, or just in general, detaching their afterlife from that of Amleth and his father.
Yeah. And so do you want to talk about what Folkvanger is, since it's again not something we normally hear about. We normally see Valhalla as Norse heaven and Hell as Norse hell. So what is Folkvanger in Norse mythology of the afterlife?
Well, I'm going to first go off on you for describing hell as hell and the other one is heaven. Valhalla is heaven. Because it is, I think, a lot in general, the average person might know that, Valhalla is where heroes go when you die. It's just that if you have your sword when you die, if you're in a fight, whatever, the Valkyries can come choose you and take you to where you're going to fight and drink and shit forever until Ragnarok, and then you fight in that. But Hell is just the neutral place where you go if you don't die in some glorious way. Folkvanger is generally described as like just kind of a counterpart to Valhalla, because it seems kind of the same. We don't have, I think, as much talking about it as Valhalla, technically, and that's probably why it is not talked about as much. I think the only thing that we get that's kind of a unique myth about it is about someone who I believe was alive going to drink with Freya in her hall. But otherwise, it is just that Freya, as a Valkyrie figure herself, chooses the other half of the slain heroes and warriors and brings them to Folkvanger in place of Valhalla. And that probably rambled a lot more than needed to, but yeah, that's what I've got there.
Well, you said you were going
Not
off
much.
on me, and I don't know how you really went off on me, because you were saying Hell is neutral, but I don't think the film presents Hell as neutral in any way. Hell's Gate is portrayed as a volcano. Hell is a place that, you know, they don't want to go because of how much they want to go to Valhall or Frey's Hall. And so I can't see it as a neutral location in how it's presented in the film or how it's often presented in stories.
This is true. It is generally about, you know, this drive in their culture for glorious death. Even spoilers, Amleth's mother and kid brother are even Fjölnir says that they're in Folkvanger, and that he'll join them there because they die fighting. But I think you also have to really deal with the fact that not everyone is going to die fighting. Like, the goal is kind of to protect your family, and if your family's safe and they don't die in battle, then you kind of have to hope that Hell isn't too bad. And I believe generally the main goal through Hell is generally perceived to be reincarnation in large part. Sometimes it is very much just, yeah, the people who are there when Ragnarok comes might be going and fighting everyone in Valhalla. But I think it is, I don't know, maybe it's hard for me to not call it a neutral place of death, since that's where so many have to go. But at least in the perspective of Amleth, and it seems everyone in the movie for the most part, except for like the Slavs, that, yeah, they desire to fulfill their fate and reach Valhalla as a sign of being good enough, strong enough, manly enough, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I also sort of disagree with the other than Slavs and also the being manly enough as that, because obviously at the end of the film, it is Olga who tells Amleth to go to Valhalla. She sort of appears in a vision to him. and she sort of lets him off the hook. You know, he is allowed to go by her. And so there is in some way that she understands the importance to Amleth. And we also know that the servant girl who is sent to Thorir, who does the whole speech before she is sacrificed to be with him on his boat, that she will seemingly be there with him. I do think there's also stories about Folkvanger about women who die nobly going to Folkvanger without it necessarily needing to be in battle. So I think that we can say Folkvanger is a place that people can go to, at least women can go to without dying in battle. And so hell doesn't have to be a neutral place for women.
I suppose. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So for all of them, for all of them, what we can sort of say is that hell is a bad place because, you know, you don't want to grow old. There is a sort of ageist assumption that, you know, being graybeard is going to be bad for you, which at least Amleth has. I guess we don't see many other examples of toxic masculinity other than with Hamr and with Aurvandil, at least in the afterlife space. So I do think hell is depicted in the film negatively, and I think that the reason for that is because we have this secret third option that most people don't ever hear about. Although we can also talk about how when Amleth finds the bodies of Gudrun and Gunnar, that they are dead next to a horse. So we know that Fjölnir took his horse with his dead wife and child to the next to a volcano and then slaughtered the horse to carry them away to the afterlife, which I think is just a sort of weird further thing about, you know, why do some people sort of need that extra push, as with Thorir and all of Fjölnir's children, that nobody else in the movie seems to get, though we're expected to believe Amleth goes to Valhalla. But I guess that is sort of I'm digressing there. I think it is funny because obviously Fjölnir is sending his wife and child to a different afterlife, and as soon as Amleth comes across them, he's just like, no, of course I'll meet you guys again in Valhalla. And it's just like, well, will you? It's not really what they believe. And so that is...
And what do you think? I was gonna ask what you think of the gates of hell being a volcano.
I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. So, to talk about that, I guess let's get into that other character that I think is represented by Amleth, which is not Fenrir, but is in fact Garmr, the Hellhound, the Hound of Hell, the Guardian of Hell's Gate. So, we know that the name of the volcano is Hell's Gate because he's able to draw Draugr there. It's also, I think, the name of the act. So I think there's a few reasons that we know that, because it comes up in big letters, like the name of the axe, and I think Hell's Gate is the name of that one. And so, him being the guardian of Hell's Gate, Garmr, who is also sometimes likened to being the exact same figure as Fenrir, the bound wolf, makes a lot of sense again when we're looking at it as this is the gates of hell in Ragnarok, when Surtur is destroying everything, and now Fenrir has released himself from his slave chains and is coming to kill the man who controlled and bound him. He is coming to kill Odin, Fjölnir. And so it sort of encapsulates this moment of, this is Hell's Gate at Ragnarok, the end of fate for these two characters. So when we're saying, right, because he sees the bodies of Gunnar and Gudrun, and he immediately repeats his oath as a child, but this time, instead of saying, I will avenge you, father, I will save you, mother, I will kill you, Fjölnir, he says, I will avenge you, I will protect my bloodline. I think that's what it is. I have it written down. I might have said that one wrong. And then the last thing he says is, I will cut the thread of fate. Or I will honor our blood is the second thing he says. So rather than saving his mother, he's going to honor their blood. And the third thing he says is, I will cut the thread of fate. And that has to do with, because he is fated to do this, it's hard to see him cutting any fate here. I do think it's just about the end of Odin and his own life. I think that we can connect him to Fenrir here, because Fenrir, of course, after killing Odin, is prophesized to be killed by Odin's son through a stab through the heart. I think that he flips that script around by stabbing Thorir in the heart prior in the film, sort of beginning that by already taking out and eating a heart, which later Odin himself is able to just barely manage to pay back by stabbing him in the heart before he gets devoured by the wolf. So that's my belief in why Hell's Gate is a volcano. Do you have anything other thoughts on that?
Not really. Not right now.
Okay. So, we discussed all of this. We've discussed Frey as a god. We've, in some way, while talking about Folkvanger, talked about Freya as a goddess. And I do think that it is important that their names are so similar and that they're so similar in their features in this film, and that you can kind of flip back and forth between talking about Frey and Freya and still sort of be talking about the same person, even though they are twins. Can you first, before I ask you the next question, can you first just talk about the Vanir that Frey and Freya are and their role in the Aesir pantheon?
Well, mythologically speaking, the Vanir and Aesir at some point had a war and had basically a treaty at the end of the war where Freya and Freyr sometimes are generally seen as joining the Aesir. Freyr historically has been considered, like, in the Rosetta Sturluson writes that Freyr was the most worshipped of the Aesir. Freya is often attributed to also be the figure of Frigg, Odin's wife. Their father, Njord, comes and lives in a hall in Asgard after the war as part of the treaty. But basically, the idea is just that it was two faiths, two pantheons coming together.
Okay. Now that you talked about their father and them, and what the the things about the Vanir and their distinction between the Aesir as two different peoples, can I ask you what Loki says about them in the Lokasena, the flitting poem from the Poetic Edda?
Yes, Loki's fighting. He makes a lot of accusations in that poem. He basically, the story is Loki goes to this party they're all having and throws a bunch of accusations against the gods, which I believe a lot of them are generally just disregarded as Loki's just being an asshole and saying things. But he does accuse their father of I don't remember exactly what the accusation with their father is. It's basically that he had, I believe, Freyr and Freyr with his sister, and Loki accuses Freyr and Freya of incest.
Yes.
Yeah.
He does. He does accuse Freya of seducing Freyr. It is very much that he says something along the lines of, you raised arousal in your brother, or something along the lines of that to Freya. So with that in mind, let's get into the other lead of the film, Olga of the Birch Forest, who in this film plays the role of, let's jump to actually a different play here, a play older than Saxo Grammaticus's History of the Danes, into the Oresteia by Aeschylus, a story of Greek mythology, where in this story, the Oresteia, there is a king returning from a war. When he does so, it turns out, unknown to him, that his wife has been in love with his brother and they are plotting his murder. He comes home, she tricks him to coming into a place where he's unprotected, and then her and his brother kill this king, Agamemnon, dead. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, returns, learns that his mother and his uncle, now the king and queen of the place, are there and they killed his father. And so he goes and, with the help of his sister, who is a household servant of Clytemnestra, their mother, and their uncle, I forget the name of him, she helps basically poison their drinks and sneak him into the house so that he can get his revenge, the sister being Elektra. Now, we've talked about Oedipus, the Oedipian complex. We haven't talked so much about the Elektra complex, which is the female equivalent of the Oedipus complex, where a woman, based off of this story of the Oresteia or other versions of this myth, will kill her mother and want to have sex with her father as a sort of psychosexual development that Freud believes in. Of course, this is heavily developed out of Shakespeare's Hamlet, and I think it is heavily implied here in the Northman, in that Olga plays the role of Elektra in a way I've never seen Ophelia or Amleth's foster sister in the History of the Danes by Saxo Grammaticus. Nobody plays the role of Elektra in any Hamlet-like story, any Amleth-like story, more than Olga of the Birch Forest does here in the Northman. So, she seems to take up the role of the sister. She does this very well. We already know that there is this connotation of brothers and sisters having sex with one another, with Frey and Freya, with their father and his sister. We have the very story of Amleth and the foster sister being about Amleth and a foster sister getting together, which would eventually become the Hamlet and Ophelia duo. We have Gudrun and Gunnar, the mother and youngest son in this film, who are named after a sister and brother duo, both involved with the death of Sigurd and Brunhild, as we talked about Heimr earlier with this. And of course, there is this sort of Oedipus complex that we're talking about. So, I am going to now say, do you know where the name Olga comes from?
I do not.
The name Olga is a Slavic name derived from the Norse name Helga, which both of them basically mean blessed, right? But I would point out the fact that Olga's name comes from the name Helga, sister of Fenrir, the Lord of Garmr. And so, in recognizing this, what we see being implied is that Amleth is the brother of Olga, controlled by her into killing the people who are oppressing her people, the Slavs, the slaves. Obviously, Slav is a term which gave us the word slave, so it's kind of funny to be talking about this. But this is something that I think a lot of people miss as a possibility because they don't think about her name being, first of all, a Slavic name derived from a Norse name, obviously showing some sort of cultural mixing between her as a Slav and the Norse, also her being seen as like a Valkyrie with the blonde hair, which, you know, we can pass that off, but I think that that's there. We can see that the only women in the film are Slav slaves. This is the case. There's no woman in the film who I can think of who has any lines in the film who is not a Slavic slave. Can you?
Women in the film who have lines that are not Slavic slaves. Does the, I don't know what position that one woman has. I don't think she has lines either. The Valkyrie in the village?
The Valkyrie. This is true. She is in the Slavic village. I will acquiesce to that. But I also think that there is this other thing of it being like this weird connection, like with this whole, oh, my dog is making noises. I hope she's okay. I think she's, I don't know. But we were talking about that. I do think that that is correct. She does say, I only want your strongest, as a sort of emissary of Odin, right? And sort of giving this call out, which kind of emasculates Amleth because he feels for these people being taken into slavery. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I do think that she is maybe not Slavic necessarily, but we do know that Gudrun, his mother, Amleth's mother, is a Slavic slave, and that he's been lied to about her position as a princess of Brittany. I also think that this is there, and we can talk about this as connecting Amleth to the Slavic line and how the dynastic tree does not really point that out, how it's possible for Fjölnir to be a bastard while Amleth is sired on a slave, which I think connects them more obviously with this sort of projection thing that we're going for. But I think that ultimately is what ties us to this idea of femininity being just completely missed when it's not completely tied to what we're talking about as fate. That there is this connection between his mother with Slavic slavery and how he takes on this role of Slavic slavery, and that immediately kind of feminizes him. It is something that he is called a she-wolf, obviously hearkening to Garmr, to being the wolf of hell rather than the wolf of Odin. His work as terrorizing these people takes him away from being a patron of Odin and actually worshipping hell in the way that he falls in love with Olga. And to further that point, the seer tells Amleth that the reason she is telling him all of this is because he will beget the Maiden King as the next member of the line of kings in that sort of dynastic tree. I don't know what they're ruling because they don't keep the same kingdom they had before. They have Iceland. But he is in this position where he has been feminized because he has taken on the role of slave, he has taken on the role of Slav, he has taken on the role of hound to a woman. And I believe that his role as hound to hell, as lover to Olga, is that he is a weapon to be used by her to cut down the Norse who would destroy her people, rather than him being there to protect his family. He is always there to destroy what he considers his family for the Slavic family he doesn't even think about as being his, or the Norse family that Olga doesn't even think about as being hers. That the dynastic tree does not point to people who are born out of Slavic slavery as any different from somebody who's born out of noble Norse blood. And that eventually the line will end with a Maiden King. And I think the term Maiden King is a funny one, because Maiden, I would think, as with the Valkyries, sort of refers to a sort of virginal figure. I don't think it necessarily has to, but that is where my mind immediately goes, that it is this queen who will never have children, who will never further this line. And so when Amleth is asking what the Slav witch will get from him doing all of this, and she says the Maiden King, what she is saying she will get is the end of his bloodline. And even if we say, okay, Maiden King doesn't have to be virginal, maybe she could have children, I think the very fact that the dynastic power doesn't go to the son, the twin son, but in fact goes to the twin daughter, the girl, is signifying the rise of the Slavic Russian people over the Norse Viking people. And so it has been a carefully crafted manipulation by Olga to get Amleth to do all of these things, in the same way that Amleth was manipulated in his youth into believing all of these things about his own mother. And so, when people are trying to tell me that when he is escaping and he's on the ship with Olga, he has a chance to run away, I don't think he does, because Olga is already in his head and has already utilized the cultural values that he has in place to manipulate him into murdering Fjölnir and his family. And I would point to evidence being, as soon as he jumps off that ship, Olga darts it out of there. She immediately uses all her magic she can to make the ship get away, rather than, she's trying to convince him not to go. And then as soon as he goes, she's just like, all right, let's get out of here, which I think is hilarious. I think it's such a weird thing to do if you actually cared about him not going. And then we also have, past that, again, when he is stabbed in the heart, he has a vision of her with those children, and she is the one who tells him, yeah, you can go to Valhalla. She's already weaseled her way into his heart and has, put the seeds, messed with his mind in the way she has messed with people's minds throughout the story. He has the strength to break bodies, she has the strength to break minds. That is what they say from the very beginning of the film together. And she has broken his mind, and she has used him for this very good purpose of freeing slaves and ending the slavers. And so I kind of draw this from the reveal of Gudrun and everything she did, which at first appears to be something that is evil and awful, but I think what Gudrun does is the same thing that Olga does, and I think both are equally viable as good and ethical options for the future. And so it is a story about being blind to women, being blind to your bloodline in women, his Slavic culture coming from his mother that he doesn't think about at all. And that not only is he not paying heed to women, he doesn't think about them as much at all. And so really the story is about listening to women and understanding what it is that they're actually saying to you. And if you think it is just a story about revenge, I mean, it is a story about revenge. It is Olga's revenge against those who enslaved her and destroyed her land and her people, and the rise of her Slavic daughter. Thoughts?
I can agree with that. I don't.
Yeah. This is just like the Gates of Hell, where Amleth is fighting Fjölnir.
I don't know how to defeat Claudius.
This is just like the Gates of Hell.
I'm not even Hamlet. I'm some guy who crashed into Hamlet and killed him.
Okay, this is just
or
like
maybe
the Gates of Hell.
we're together. I'm not really sure.
But yeah, I think all of that is to say that by following the threads of incest, leading it back to Hell and Fenrir, we can see that there is this weird false dichotomies that they push into, and by deciding to make one decision and not accepting the fact that you are actually two or maybe three things, you are both man and woman, you are both Norse and Slav, you blind yourself to those people who can accept some of those things and the use of both of those things, in the way that Olga can accept the use of her control over the Norse culture to control Amleth in order to further the goals of the Slavs. So, was there more that you wanted to say, since I think that's all I have to say for my analysis of the film?
That's all that you have to say?
For my analysis, yeah. I think, of course, we can talk about, how Slav is related to slave and how that's related to femininity, and how Amleth takes on femininity as insanity rather than insanity on its own. We can talk about how Amleth falls to insanity, especially with Olga. But that's all I have to say, really, about what I think the film is about and how we can get to what the film is about.
Okay. My only thing that I really have to talk about is, the Norse magic in the film.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I think it is fun. I think I have things I would say about it.
Okay, well, first off, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this fight? What is that?
You have to cut his head off. You have to cut his head off. It's the gates of hell.
How? All I can do is click music notes, and then he laughs at me. I don't know if there's some order I'm supposed to be clicking them. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. It's not working. I don't.
It's the gates of hell.
I don't get it. I don't know if I'm supposed to know music to understand this. I don't know if I'm supposed to just be clicking them better. I don't know what's happening.
No, I haven't really been hearing.
It might just be that I have to
audio,
click them really fast.
It's been nice. I haven't really been hearing any audio on this. I've
Oh.
been listening to my own audio, so I haven't had to think about it.
Okay, well, anyways.
Yeah, talk about the magic.
His health was not missing. Yeah, so of course, in one of the first big scenes in the movie, we have this whole coming of age ritual for young Amleth. And how did you word what he's taught about women? To like women but not be too gay about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, literally in the movie, what he's told is, they say, why did Odin pluck out his eye to learn the secret magics of women? Never seek the secret magics of women. Fate is to be known by woman, and we shouldn't deal with that. But then they immediately pull this terrified young Amleth to touch his father's wound, his
bleeding slit.
His bleeding slit, yes, is this Ionic symbol, and his contact with his blood allows him to see the Tree of Kings, and his father guides him through that. And at the end of the movie, we see this Tree of Kings again, and it very much is, it's the story that allows him to see even kind of the future, to see that the Maiden King that will be born from Olga. And it is all in this tree that's kind of made of these twisted arteries as the branches. At some points they're, at the start of the movie, they're an umbilical cord kind of from his father to his hand. At the end of the movie, it's from his hand to his children. But what it seems like to me is he's looking at the strands of fate. He is, like his patron deity, immediately being told to actually try to take fate into his own hands, try to see fate, try to see this woman's magic, immediately after being told not to. And I think there's a lot to be said about the kind of hypocrisy that exists, wherein their patron god, their king of the gods in many attestations, does perform this feminine thing that they seem to also partake in some degree. Meanwhile, the phallic god of their enemy, who they call a coward, this god who they seem to think of as weaker, doesn't do this. There's even a line later in the movie where Fjölnir says, "No man can know whether he'll spend the next harvest as a king or a slave." Well, Amleth knows that his kid's gonna be a king. I don't know. I don't have very organized thoughts on this. But this was something I thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything more to add?
Well, I would say that you missed the part where they do say heed the magics of women. Which
True.
They do say, you know, be aware, follow their guidance, but don't get it for yourself. And I would say that, of course, when we see it in the beginning, we can see the past, which he might not know. But as I've said before, the magic itself, the ability to see this dynastic tree, is something that has been male-dominated. And the entire point of the Maiden King is the introduction of a woman, or of a girl even, into this fate. That there hasn't been a woman, as far as we can see, that women are in no way connected to this thing. And so it's hard to see that women are spinning the threads of fate here, because, we are told plenty that the Norns are. What I really think is going on here is that it is a story spun by, Gudrun or Olga, about what the men should believe is there, which is why I will frequently sort of say, it's hard for me to see him actually going to Valhalla at the end there. I mean, he's at Hell's Gate, and we can see his body being carried up, but we never see him actually get through the threshold. I do think that it is implied there, but I also want to know, if both of his children are born alive and well, why does the girl become the Maiden King? How does that sort of go? This is something we don't really know. It's just sort of something he accepts. And I think it is this blind acceptance of what fate should be, which is a failure on his part as a man, that he has a glimpse into fate and he doesn't really understand what that means, because it already is obfuscated from him in such a way that, despite being able to see the dynastic tree, he thought his mother was from Brittany and not a Slavic slave. Despite being able to see the dynastic tree, he doesn't really recognize the face of his son. He really only sees the face of his daughter. It's kind of there, barely off to the side. You know, it's just something that he sees, he is told, and he immediately goes, of course that's right. In the same way that he doesn't kill Fjölnir, and he immediately goes, oh, of course I'm not going to kill Fjölnir now. I have to kill him at the volcano. And it's like, no, kill him now. What you are doing is listening to a woman who wants you dead and saying, oh, that must be right. And so that's what I think the whole thing with that is about, is he is doing exactly what his father and his uncle have told him to do. He is glimpsing into woman's magic. He is using it for himself and is not thinking that much about it. Which is why, you know, when he calls the witches and he says witch in such a way that it's clearly meant to be bitch, right? He says it with such venom that it's clearly a sexist derogatory term. And he says it to the Slavic seer, to Björk, and he says it to the he-witch. He says to the he-witch, I wrote it down the other night, like last night actually. I wrote it down what he said when I was rechecking things out. He says, speak, witch, with that same sort of venom of it obviously being a slur, being a sexist slur. And the he-witch responds back, so be it, slave. And I think that's really funny because witch in this term is being used as a sexist derogatory term, calling the he-witch a woman, and the he-witch immediately responds to Amleth by calling him a slave, a derogatory term comparing him to woman. We can find a similar thing happening when Gudrun reveals herself to Amleth. She says to Amleth, you are your mother's son. And with the same speed that the witch responded to Amleth, Amleth responds to his mother, and my father's. And so we see multiple instances where people are pointing out to Amleth his delving into the feminine magics, into feminine traits of hiding yourself and obfuscating what you are actually doing. And every time he falls back on his masculinity and doesn't think that much about what they're actually saying about him because he immediately takes it as an insult. And so, again, it is a story about a man who recognizes women in a way in society as maybe even something deserving to be turned into a princess. But he doesn't actually see them as people who are actually benefiting him. And if he could see the benefit of them, he might not be in a position where he waited to go to the volcano to get himself killed. That is my take on that and everything else in the movie. That yes, Amleth does dabble in femininity, but he will never let it be the real thing. He always has to put on that facade of masculinity, and that is exactly what stops him from being able to survive, from actually being able to protect anybody who he considers kin, and instead sides with a group that he doesn't really see as kin, that he has been manipulated by their acknowledgement of him as a man, and he can barely acknowledge them as anything other than something to foster his children. And so if it's a story about revenge, then it's a story about the righteousness of destroying your oppressor. And if it's a story about, gender and sexuality, then it's a story about being true to yourself and not putting on a facade of an identity just because you think that's what you are, rather than recognizing that you are both that and this, and the thesis and the antithesis. Anything further on that point? I mean, we can talk about the He-Witch and how I think the He-Witch is funny because, you know, obviously Heimr has both his eyes removed and then he's given new balls, right? He is sort of castrated and given his masculinity back in order to be able to speak with Amleth. And I think that in a way we can sort of view the He-Witch in his stance and in his recreation of balls for Heimr to be a eunuch, a castrated person. So, I added a little bit on, but now is there anything further on that point?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then, now that I've talked about how I interpret the film and how I don't quite see it as a story about the flaws of revenge, I will say that I thought overall it was enjoyable to watch. I think there's a few parts where I was just like, you know, that could have been something that was more fun, but it is this sort of weird, unreliable narrator, I think, breaking through a lot of the time. You know, with Amleth having his head messed with by Olga and everything else already slightly being insane before that point. That I think really makes it to that end of that film where they have that big duel at Hell's Gate, and we get this weird sort of vision into the family and him going to Valhalla, that it just kind of felt like, oh, I guess it's over. I guess that's it. And so, well, I thought it was fun. I thought, obviously, it has these things that I've talked about that I think are fun to discuss and unravel. I would say that I would give the film experience itself a 7 out of 10. I would say with further unraveling, it's a lot more fun, but watching the movie itself, I think, is just good. It's good. How about you? What are your review of the film?
I like it. I like Robert Eggers. I think the cinematography is really pretty, and the actors are all great, and I like how the script kind of like, it feels like it varies from chapter to chapter between like a dialogue heavy drama and a Norse saga with almost riddle matches when he talks to the He-Witch and the Seer, and I think violence in film is fun.
True.
It's a solid 9 out of 10 for me.
A solid 9 out of 10. Oh, well, hi in chat. We're good. I think we're just about finishing with this stream, actually. We've given our review of the film. Hexmatron, on the other end, is playing some game. I don't know what's happening. Something to do with Hamlet. But yeah. So That's our review. Do you have any final words?
I hate this fucking game. I'm so confused.
Sick.
I don't know what I'm doing. I've been barely able to pay attention to this conversation. It just sucks. Oh my god.
Incredible. This is exactly what I wanted. So, thank you for whoever's watching right now for coming to the first meeting of the Z24 Movie Club. I have given my analysis, I have given my review, I've gotten a review from Hexmatron. We have talked through a lot of things. And so, with that, wherever you are, I hope you have a good day or a good night. Bye!